Hello, travelers, and welcome. Welcome, patrons. Thank you so much for being here at our Season 3 Q&A. And thank you so much for supporting the show. I'm Noah Symes. You may or may not know me as the voice of Peter Nureyev or Ransom. And you, and also the sometimes host of these sometimes Q&As. Or Q's and A's, excuse me. I'm currently being upstaged by a dog, so let me turn it over to my three guests, it turns out, so they can introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Paisley, say hello.
This is. What did you think would happen if not this?
So good. She wanted to come up on my lap, and then the second we started streaming, she was like, "Get me out of here."
Well,
you
yeah.
Get down?
She's a very.
Do you want to get down?
She's a very private
right.
lady.
Can you get down? Well, anyway, this is Pine Slice. She's my baby, and she's leaving. Which is probably for the best.
You need to pull
very
yourself
much
in
so.
more.
Yes.
Okay.
There you go.
So, hi, Noah. Getting the dog's adorable, and getting upstaged by the dog is a very real thing, isn't it?
I mean, they say never work with animals or babies.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, now she's crying.
Oh boy.
She's
And
meeping.
Pine Slice is both.
Animal babies. Hi, did we even introduce ourselves, or were we
Guess
distracted?
who we
You did
are.
not. No, you also got upstaged by
Hi.
the dog.
I'm Kevin Vibert. I've been the lead writer and co-creator of this show.
I'm Sophie Takagi Gaynor. I'm the other co-creator and sound designer and director.
Well, thank you both so much for sitting down and doing this. I'm excited to sort of reflect on the season that was and get some questions from folks out there in the chat. And we've also received a few questions via Patreon, so I'll be peppering those in as well. So to start us off, why don't I start with one of those? I'm sorry, I don't have the names attached to these, but we have this question. Just a good one to start with is, what was everyone's favorite part of the season to create? And this person would love to hear favorites from both the Juniverse and the second Citadel storylines.
Okay, that's tough.
Yeah. Do you want to? What
Only one.
do you want to talk from a sound design perspective? Like, what was a moment that was like really fun to design? Your favorite episode to put together?
Okay. I'm really gonna have trouble sticking to like this is my one favorite.
Sure.
But I have I mean, obviously, What Lies Beyond Part 1 was very special. And I really, really loved putting together the wedding scene. Yeah, that was something that felt very good to do, and I really took my time with it. I was lucky
And
enough
I
to get
imagine
work with
it's
some violin
nice to
music.
have. I imagine it's nice to have a break from like lasers and explosions.
Yeah,
too,
it
because
is.
We have a lot of those.
Yes,
Like,
action
to do
is
something sort of
quiet.
Something more homier.
Yeah, action is very exhausting to put together. It means that I'll be spending a really, really long time on a very short, period. Like, it could be 1 minute that you're listening to, but it could take me days, just to put together that 1 minute. So it is very exhausting, and I think that it's good to have all that action in there, and I think it means that we kind of earn the quiet moments that we do have. But the wedding scene was really special. I think everyone turned in such a beautiful performance, and I love working with music, and I had some really great music to work with. So that one's pretty special to me.
And you wrote Vespa's Vows.
Yes, you're really nice to keep giving me credit for that. It's because like you wrote the whole everything else.
It's a remarkable moment.
But and I imagine that that it feels different working on sound designing around text that you created.
Yeah.
I imagine that's a different experience.
No,
I wouldn't know.
It was very special, and I'm glad that I got to do it.
I think for the Juniverse, the episode that I was probably the most like out of my mind excited writing was What Lies Beyond Part 2. Because we did a thing that we've been doing ever since Train from Nowhere, which is a process that I really, really like, which is basically where we, in the pitch for an episode to each other, we kind of pitch a huge problem that we have no idea what the solution is. And then the sort of challenge is we need to figure out the solution before we even raise the problem to you, right? The situation needs to seem unsolvable, but we need to have a solution before we ever give it to you. Otherwise, it's not reasonable. So for that one,
this is the strategy to avoid the lost syndrome.
Exactly, right.
Ooh, yeah.
And so Train from Nowhere is the one that I call out because I felt like we really kind of codified that in that episode. There's a moment at the beginning where Nureyev says like the thesis statement of Train from Nowhere, which is that like that's an uncatchable train and we are going to catch it.
Right.
It's very, very easy to get across. For this one, it was us pitching to each other, how can Juno plan a jailbreak while he's literally constantly under watch from the head guard, from Sasha Wire, right? And was totally stumped, completely stumped, until I happened to read that little fact about hydrogen peroxide and acetone, and I couldn't shut up about it for weeks, or actually months, because I can't shut up about it now either.
That was nuts. Second Citadel.
Second Citadel.
I really loved working on the Priestess's Fortune, which is the penultimate arc of this season. And there's another quiet moment in that I really, really love. It's when Olala sees Tilay again. And they get to talk about death. And I really loved getting to do that. I mean, it was a bummer that I wasn't able to record with Marge in the studio for that. But, because since I'm the director, I did, get to hear her act it before I recorded my part of it, which helped a lot. And that was another one where I worked a little bit with music, although it was just music that I found, and a lot of just wind noises and falling leaves. And I mean, the writing in that scene is fantastic. So
thank you.
Yeah, I loved working on it.
I just loved getting to explore the Western Wastes more in this season. Second in Juno, I'm really interested in kind of exploring what's this character going to do when we put them in this situation, and I am in Second Citadel too. In Second Citadel, the world also really draws me in, and I always want to take that map and add in a little bit more detail in a way that, just because the galaxy is so huge, we kind of can't do in Juno. We can tell you about a given planet, but there are so many that what impact on the culture of all humanity would that have? You know what I mean?
The Western Wastes are my ideal place for Everfall.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very different style of filling in that map, right? It's, it's little pinpricks with vast space in between them,
right?
Versus, a more traditional sort of.
It's like how I experience the world of a book. Because I don't drive and I only take the train everywhere, so everything is just one little spot.
Right, wherever you pop up, that exists
I don't
on
know
its
how
own,
they're connected.
unconnected. Yeah. We had one quick little question from the chat, which is they were wondering if it was a violin or a viola in the wedding scene.
Oh, maybe it was a viola. I mean, the musician plays both, and there was also some editing done to it, so it sounded weird for what it was. And I think also she layered herself playing 5 different parts, which helps to have us imagine
which
that
will
Nureyev
disguise
is playing
it a little bit,
right?
Yeah.
But Nureyev is playing some sort of instrument that we are unfamiliar with that has so many strings. I guess
just like viola-ish. Yeah.
Right.
The viola has evolved in the centuries since. I should point out, folks in the chat, feel free to drop questions in there. I will just be able to pull them as I happen to see them. There's no real structure here, so I may or may not get to yours, and I apologize that I won't be able to get to all of them, but feel free to start dropping questions in there as well. I have one here that says, which storyline was more exciting to work on production-wise? And I suspect the answer here may be slightly equivocating, but...
To hear this is a slightly equivocating answer, but I swear at the end of this I will say one of the two series. So what we did to set up this season that was really exciting and also really scary is at the end of last season, or we basically decided that in this season the way that we follow the story for the two series is a little bit switched. The Juno series, which has always followed one character and we're very in his head, is going to become for a season an ensemble show, right? And the second Citadel series, which has always been this ensemble bouncing around. We talked about point of view being contagious, right? We follow Mark and Caroline and Angelo, etc. Second Citadel was going to be all stories featured this one character, Olala. I think that which of those was more exciting from like the writing standpoint specifically? Doing a super deep dive on your characters, you just kind of can't beat it. And so because the characters in the Juno storyline had already been established and we just got to dive deeper into them, I'd say I got more thrills writing that this season. The equivocation is that I think we've set up Second Citadel in such a place that, like, of the two series, that's the one that I am champing at the bit for season 4. I am so excited to get back in there.
I have a different way of equivocating, which is that I think that in some ways for the first half of the season, Second Citadel was a little more exciting to me because it was a little bit like having that freshness of starting something completely new. Because that always feels like kind of a risk. Like the first half of Fool in the Garden of Death felt stressful because it was like, hey, we know you're here to find out more about all those characters you got to know. None of them. You get none of them. Mm-hmm. Not one. Here's somebody completely new. And that's always stressful. And of course, that is kind of how we set up Second Citadel in the beginning, but it's been a long time and people have gotten really attached to the characters that we do have. And so it was scary and exciting to say, oh my gosh, I hope they like this new place and this new character that we're featuring. And that was very exciting. I think near the end of the season, I started to get really excited about Juno and just like the momentum going into the end of the season and the fact that we knew we were going back to Juno's perspective, but then we had this additional twist of getting to see Sasha's perspective, and the culmination of a lot of things that we had been planning.
Yeah, I like your answer.
Thank you, me too.
I think I like your answer better than mine.
Yes, me too.
Here's a good one. What were some of the pros and cons of recording remotely this season?
Okay.
Sort of behind the scenes stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's actually quite answerable.
Absolutely, go
because
for it.
the biggest upside was scheduling.
I was going to say I could answer this one.
Yes, Noah knows all about that because he manages the scheduling.
Right, getting everyone in a room together
is awful.
Is difficult because we often need multiple sessions. We need a rehearsal, and we have some very talented actors who are very in demand,
right? Are doing other things
by other people making art,
right?
So yeah, that is often very difficult. And suddenly it became so easy to schedule these one-on-one sessions,
right? Because it was just like, well, I was home. Mm-hmm. And so all we had to do was find a time when one person could record with me. So that was
right. So, that I assume that's the only pro, but I don't know. That's the one I felt.
I think that's the only pro. I mean, it made my job a lot harder on every level. Because suddenly I had to spend exponentially more time on the recording process and then exponentially more time on maybe not exponentially, more time on the designing process because people aren't having live conversations. I'm having to splice them together afterwards, which I do not like. Makes directing way harder because I have to sort of remember how person A delivered something and report that back to person B if necessary.
Yeah, which is just an insane thing that you have to do now. I mean, that's wild.
And I think it's hard on the actors. I mean, they all took it in stride for sure, but the whole reason that we record in person is because that chemistry is so important to us. And I know there are some productions that sort of do everything remotely in the first place, and so they're maybe more accustomed to working on it that way. But for me, it's always been so. I've said this before, but coming from theater, like, it's so important to me to have people work together in person, and then that was gone. I think because we didn't introduce too many new characters this season, we were able to rely on a chemistry that had already been established between a lot of the actors, and that was very helpful. But it sucked. It sucked. 0 out of 10.
I will say the only other good thing about it, I would say, is that we now know we can do it.
Yes. Yes.
You know, so even when we return to being able to do it in person,
yes,
you know, it gives us more freedom to
That's
know
absolutely
that
true.
we are able to pull it off this
especially
way.
now that people have moved. And it will always be a priority to work together in person. But yeah, what about you?
I miss being there for recording. I haven't been there for recording
Yeah.
since like one of the first episodes of the season.
Yeah.
And like, it's funny because for a while there we were having sort of an issue determining like, why am I there? Actually, what's my job?
Right.
But I never felt it more strongly until I suddenly couldn't do it, which is that
No,
like,
we figured it out what your job was.
yeah, so there's even a way in which writing scripts took a lot longer because I needed the parenthetical directions to be
to
so
do the
much more
work.
specific.
Right.
Whereas before I'd like leave it blank and honestly assume someone was going to ask me a question,
Right.
which wasn't great either.
No,
Maybe I'll
that's
find a middle ground. That might be the way.
Went. Who knows? Maybe she's wreaking havoc in another room.
So here's sort of a question from the chat that a couple people have asked different versions of, which is the end of this season in the Juno storyline is a lot more, I think people said, sort of open-ended than the previous couple seasons. I guess and I'm curious about this too. So I guess the way I would phrase it is, you know, it seems to be leaning more heavily into the next season than previous seasons have, right? It leaves a lot of questions
Unanswered.
to be answered later down the road rather than sort of wrapping anything up there. Any thoughts about, you know, was that a conscious choice or was that sort of a function of another decision you'd made? What led to that?
That was definitely a conscious choice, especially like the closer that we got to it. It was from the very beginning. It was our suspicion that because of, you know, bouncing between perspectives, you're sort of not going to be able to. We wouldn't be able to explore like an entire transformation within Juno, for example. So one of the reasons that it was really nice to jump between perspectives and really useful actually is because I think I said this before, but Juno's like personal development, I think during this year is in a place where it's very important and good, and also honestly just kind of boring to watch. He's just figuring it out. He's come to his big conclusions. He needs to learn how to apply them. It involves a lot of making the same mistakes over and over again, and that can only carry you so far. So I loved being able to check in on what other characters were going through during that time. Besides that, though, I think that maybe for me, from the story planning perspective, what we did over the two halves of season 2 bit me in a way that, like, that it gave me kind of like a creative high that I've been chasing ever since, is maybe how I'd put it. Because by expanding the story in that way, knowing where it's going to end, but giving yourself the space to like really elaborate on the mysteries and kind of bury yourself in them, it was just so much more fulfilling for me to explore the answers to those mysteries later on. So I guess for me, mentally, in terms of like macro plot, season 3 most resembles like the first half of season 2, which was a season long. So that, I think that's kind of the answer to the question, right? Is season 3 is a lot of setup, and we're aware of it, and we did it on purpose. But we've got the payoff. We got the payoffs coming. We know what they are.
Yeah, and like, I don't know, they're like, it's a nice thing about not writing for a network, you know, and like having a specific number of episodes per season, or, you know, wondering whether you're going to be renewed for the next season and stuff like that, because do what's going to work for the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's always, I think it's more important to us to like have an arc that feels good, the roller coaster of that, versus like, well, we're going to answer these questions in this set amount of time.
Right.
That was not a promise that was made. And like, we will, but you know, it just didn't happen in the season, which is fine.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. I think, you know, I know it's part of your collective sort of, I don't know if it's your mission statement, but you know, I know it's your goal to never sort of let yourself fall into complacency by doing the same thing again. So I think it's cool to have.
Except people yelling on other sides of doors, we will do that till the end of
you know,
time.
you're never going to shake everything. Yeah.
Hyper specific cliches and typecasts only. Joshua Elon will, and I'm going to make a called shot right now that nobody should take me seriously on. Joshua Elon will murderously chase a Kate Jones character, even though he's supposed to be someone that she trusts, one more time before the show is through.
You say this so often.
I know. It's just so specific. I don't know how we did it and didn't notice till like a year later.
Well, it helped that in the early days there were about 4 of us playing all the parts.
Yeah,
That's true.
Yeah,
That's true.
There were only so many combinations. I'm going to ask a question that I don't fully understand because everyone in the chat wants to know.
I'm nervous. That makes me nervous.
It probably should.
Great.
Something about Buddy's teeth. Oh, thank God. Here's a more reasonably written one. Okay. If Buddy only drinks alcohol and drinks nail polish, that would probably damage her teeth. So if she doesn't have teeth, does she have fake teeth?
God, leave that
That's
woman
the question.
alone.
I don't know. I feel like once we get to the point where you've accepted enough sci-fi contrivances that you're okay with someone drinking only alcohol and nail polish remover, and you're not going to ask if their stomach's all right, I think I'm going to use my brother's line for all sci-fi things for that. They figured it out. They just figured it out. I don't know. Maybe Buddy doesn't want to say.
So she's got teeth of some kind. We can we can put a stamp on that.
Mm-hmm. She can chew.
Great. Boy, can she ever chew.
If she wanted to.
Let's not get carried away. She's not like a remarkable chewer, but she can chew.
She's not
an
like
average
known
chewer.
for it.
Yeah. Getting a little back on track. Someone in the chat wanted to know if you, because of course I think you've been pretty open about the fact that the idea for doing this sort of moving perspective thing in season 3 of the Juniverse came from sort of real world restrictions on who was able to do what when.
Right.
If you had not told this season as an ensemble story, do you have any sense of how different the actual story would have been, or is that too hard a road to go down? Like it just informs everything about it.
I mean, I think there's probably certain things that we will get to that we would have gotten to earlier.
Yes.
I think that would have changed.
Yeah. But I bet there are aspects of the structure that would stay the same. I bet it would be a series of Juno adventures where we were like, this is a very Vespa-centric adventure. This is a very jet-centric adventure.
Yes, we probably would have done that.
Yeah, but again, I also think it just would have been like a lot worse in a way that is difficult to get across, because it has so much to do also with just the way that we thought about and planned episodes for this season.
Yes.
Like it would look so fundamentally different because the challenge that we put on ourselves of we're entering a new headspace every episode, we're exploring this galaxy from 5 brand new perspectives, right? Kind of dictated a lot about everything from the world building to the overarching plot and everything. So it would be... The reason I bring that up is because when we did like Writing Fiction Across the Void, I said that like sometimes when you place a restriction on yourself, that's what's like activates your creativity.
Yes.
Giving ourselves that challenge was like the thing that sparked the engine that made season 3 as good as it was.
Yeah.
I think.
Definitely, there's some things that I feel like we know we're going to do in season 4 that probably would already have happened in season 3. I do think that's the case. And then there's always some things that like there are ideas that we have that are not attached to anything yet, and then we talk about them and we're like, how are we going to incorporate this into what we already have? And I think a good example of that is what ended up being Tools of Rust, because I was like, I just think it would be really cool to work with a musician and build that into an arc and have them, give them an acting role, make them a character, build that character around the performer, they're a musician, and work that into the story. And so that was an idea that sort of pre-existed. And then we were like, okay, we're going to make it part of the Jet story. And that's kind of how that came to be. And if we hadn't been doing the round robin thing, it would have happened elsewise.
Yeah,
sure. While you sort of alluded to season 4 there, and I know we don't want to say too much about it. I know we don't know too much about it at this point, but I know from a macro perspective, you kind of know where we're going. So here's one question that I think is probably fair game, because it can't possibly reveal anything. Which is, if you had to give a one-word summary of season 4, what would it be? Let's say Juno and Second Citadel. This was someone in the chat, but I am enjoying torturing you with this.
I've got one for Second Citadel.
What?
Big. That's it.
Okay, I get it.
Big.
But
all right, your turn.
Tom
I
Hanks.
did not like the facial expression that came with
Big?
that. It made me uncomfortable. For Juno, ouch.
Well, yeah. No. Okay, big and ouch. That, frankly, feels pretty on brand. Great. One other season 4 question while we're on it. Can we expect to hear some new voice talent in season 4, or can we expect to revisit any of our old favorite voice talent in season 4?
Yes and yes.
You don't get to know who.
No, definitely not. But something that I am really looking forward to for season 4, because season 3, as I mentioned before, we didn't really add that many new characters. We added a couple more to Second Citadel, I guess, but more at the beginning anyway. And we added maybe 2 to Juno.
I think there were literally 3 new characters in the entire Juno season.
Yeah, and mostly at the beginning.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. And, previously it had been a lot more of like encountering minor characters every episode. And it's not to say that we'll go back to doing exactly that, but we will definitely be moving to a format where we do get the opportunity to meet more new people, which I'm really excited about, because it's been fantastic to work with the same group of people, but it's also wonderful to add new people.
Yeah, exactly.
And particularly with hopefully the pandemic coming to an end, that will be very nice in season 4.
Great. Excuse me. I just choked on nothing, as one does. Excuse me. So here's another question from the chat is, what was the thought behind the tarot references in Second Citadel? I assume we're talking here largely about the... Posters. I mean, obviously there's the thought stream in the story itself, but then the posters and the titles.
I think that was one of the things that the first... So Fool in the Garden of Death was totally written before we came to that decision. A lot of our ideas about the whole structure of season 3 and the plot for season 3 of Second Citadel were already written by the time we kind of came up with the tarot idea. I forget how much Milo had to do with that idea, because I know that Milo really like elevated it into the cards for the posters, which I love.
Yes. I don't think he came up with the idea for it to be tarot themed, but I think that he developed it a lot, and like built it into the structure of what the posters look like.
Yeah. For me, a lot of it was that like with Olala, we had kind of set out to do a very, very, very classic hero's journey story, right? Like you and I have both said in the past that we think that the over application of that model to all stories is a little nonsense, because if you're vague enough, you can make anything fit into any category.
Right. But that doesn't mean it's not fun.
No, yeah, this is very direct to the point where like the part in the journey that is called like passing through the veil of death is when Olala basically dies and goes back to the Garden of Grace, right? Like it was very direct on purpose, I guess.
I guess that's kind of how I feel about tarot too. It's like, if you're vague enough, anything means anything, but that doesn't mean it's not fun.
Exactly. It's like these are structures that I'm not convinced actually inherently measure something about the universe, but I think they can cause us to have interesting ideas about the world around us.
And what more do you need for a story?
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. It's been fun to see each episode what card mashup we would have.
Especially as we got to the end and we were like, oh my god,
as
we only have like a couple more options.
Running out of major arcana, yeah.
Yes.
The number of times that I pitched a title with Hierophant this season was one, and it didn't go over well.
Well, and then we ran into a problem, which was that we had already used the world in our last season, right? Because it ends with Battle at World's End, so we couldn't even use that one.
Yeah. Kevin, this question is for you. This is from Patreon. Have you ever had to re-record the patron names because one made you laugh?
Swalala in the Garden of Gains, if you're out there, you can show yourself and claim your prize. That's the one. I read them all. I mean, the secret is just that I read them all before I start recording. Also, so that I don't like trip over a name.
Well, yeah, they're also far from being live. Like you do as many takes as you need to.
Right. But like that one, I broke up laughing when I was reading the list away from the microphone, and then cracked up again in front of the microphone.
Yeah, I
so
remember that.
We love to hear it. Let's see in the chat here. Since Olala was so successful, would you consider adding other children or younger characters into the story?
I don't know.
I assume this question is coming out of the fact that I feel like ways back we talked about not wanting to do that because of the difficulty in convincingly portraying them using adult actors, which is something we're interested in doing, is not using actual children.
Good thing we have Marge.
Yeah. It's true. No, if we could find another Marge who can do that voice so convincingly.
And I think if we have something to say about another child character, which like
off the top of my head, no.
Yeah, I don't have much, partially because it's very, very hard to write a protagonist who is a kid and still feels like they have enough going on that they're interesting enough to follow them for a long period of time. That
the stakes are there, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, that's not a dig on kids in general.
What are we, anti-kids?
I'm just anti-child. Childs, go away. But it's just like you haven't been around very long. Not very much has happened to you. So a lot of the stuff that we do to build a character like Juno is like, what was he up to 10 years ago?
Right.
Whereas if we asked about Ola, what was she up to 10 years ago? It would be like,
well, I guess we cheated it because she has actually been around for a very long time. And a lot has happened to her.
Fair, yeah. Yeah. Is there something about the characters that surprised you or that you only realized when you were writing this season? I suspect the answer is yes, but I don't know what things.
Definitely.
Every single crew member in the carte blanche. That was
uncovering...
That was part of what was so fun about this season in Juno.
Yeah.
Buddy's whole thing where she has to like heavily plan out and rehearse what she's going to say before she says it.
Yes.
Discovered in that script.
Right. The fact that the way Jet is a reaction to the way he used to be.
Yep. The fact that like, well, I think maybe one of my favorites in that series though was just like the distance between how Vespa sounds speaking out loud and how Vespa sounds in her head. That one was one that we didn't even really realize until the script was done.
Yeah.
And then like I was looking through it and I was like, this does not sound like the same person. And that itself is really interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
The fact that internally Nureyev is like a wet mess.
Right. We gave him a Sherlock Holmes mind palace just so he could trash it. And that felt pretty good.
But like it would never be,
and it's
it would never be interesting to have a character who's like externally cool and then be like, yeah, on the inside they are cool.
Well, and I think it's obviously an interesting subversion of that character, of that type, right? Because as you say, a Sherlock Holmes type, ultra competent, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's right. Obviously, if you're going to go inside their head, that's already sort of a subversion, because usually what makes those characters work is that we don't get to see inside their head.
Right. It's just like now you see vulnerability,
yep.
and that changes something.
Right. And I think I like the way that you handled it, because you say he's a wet mess inside, but even inside his own head, he's doing his best to be what he portrays outside his head.
Yes.
Right. And that's I think what is satisfying about that, right?
Yeah. But then we also
slipping into sort of comedy.
we did get to see that with Nureyev like externalized a bit also, right? Like being so, trying not to be messy, but being so messy on the inside. And then like it turns out that does creep its way onto the outside eventually. The fact that his room is a mess. The fact that near the end of the season, he's so on edge that he's like dropping things and like, like acting erratically.
And we had established part of that in like Train from Nowhere. Or no, even in Murderous Mask, right? I found her in his pocket between half of the sandwich and the other half of the sandwich.
Yes, but I think that at that time, at least from Juno's perspective and perhaps from the audience's perspective as well, it was like, oh, how quirky. It was like a, manic pixie kind of a thing.
Right.
It wasn't like, oh, he's a mess.
Right.
We weren't, we didn't take it that way in that moment.
Sure.
Sorry, just briefly, for Second Citadel, Ola just kept growing up on us.
Please.
Yes.
Yeah, I writing a main character who's a kid is really hard, and we were very worried about it many times, especially like early on, right? I think that each episode we put out for like the first 3 Second Citadel storylines, each Ola like episode we put out, I felt a little bit like we dodged a bullet by like, oh good, the kid is still interested. Let's keep this rolling. But around Devil in the Sunlight and Strong Arm of Justice, she just like really grew up and became her own person in a way that like I was very taken aback by.
Yeah. And proud of her. Like I really love in what's the last arc called?
Judgment of the Empire.
Judgment of the Empire. When she really like comes into her own and becomes this god of death. Mm-hmm. I just love that for her. I was gonna say something
that
more
does
poignant.
feel like the natural conclusion of specifically the two of you being like, okay, we're gonna write a child. We'll do it.
Yes.
I think we can do it.
No, legitimately.
But she will become a god of death.
An ageless god of death.
Legitimately, when we knew the god of death thing, when we knew the thing that she was actually like super ancient and had already died before, like part of the pitch that we gave to each other is like, okay, so our new main character is a kid and she's the Antichrist, right? And so glad we went that way.
Oh man.
And that's feminism.
That is feminism.
Olala is girl boss, right? So here's one from a little ways back in the chat that I jotted down. Is I think this person expressed how much fun it is to see all these different characters interact and when they get sort of paired off in moments, and you get to see those particular dynamics. And they were wondering, and now I'm wondering as well, if you each have a favorite or a couple favorite character dynamics between a couple of characters.
Buddy and Jet.
Yeah.
I was going to say maybe ones that we've particularly explored this season, and that is a great one.
I just love them. I love how much they love each other and how much they're there for each other.
Buddy and Jet scenes write themselves. I feel like I just sit down and it's much closer to rough draft than any of the rest of it, and it's just because their relationship feels very real to me.
Yeah, and it's they. I mean, at least in the Juniverse, right? These are sort of the characters who have been the closest for the longest, right? Because I feel like everyone else's long-term relationships are just fraught.
Juno and Rita. Juno and Rita. That's a really
that's true.
And that's another one that I really love to see. And and I think that, not to be sappy, but I think that we draw on our own relationship for that kind of thing. People who have been friends for a very long time.
Right.
And have gone through different phases of their life together. And how important that can be in one's life.
Sort of a totally other end of the question, or other whatever. Second Citadel. One of the episodes this season that just had a pair that was so fun to write that it just went was Devil in the Sunlight. Every scene with Kuan Yi and Jack of Shadows, of all characters, just flew by. And it was largely because, I think we've said this before, every once in a while, it's nice to have a villain who's just the worst.
Yeah, and that's it, and you're done.
Yeah, he's a bad man made of shadows, and at the end he goes poof, and we feel nothing.
Right,
it's
he's
fun.
just a monster.
Right.
In a two-dimensional way.
And seeing Kuan Yi as, the more stalwart hero in that, and watching her chaotic take on being a hero, with this, this villain that's very charming. I think largely because of Stewart's performance.
So good.
And Stewart's so good.
Just nefarious enough. I was ready to write the Kuan Yi Adventure series at that point.
I thought you were going to say Kuan Yi and Olala, which is what I was going to say, because I do really love them together. Because Kuan Yi can have this sort of chaotic, kids TV show character. It's like she's talking to the kid audience at home.
Yes.
But horrible.
Right. No, very big Pee-wee's Playhouse vibes. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Kuan Yi's Playhouse.
That. And I want to see it.
That's actually a haunted house. That's not.
And I don't know, the way Olala often reacts to it is really fun because when maybe this is projection, but when kids and dogs sometimes look at you and they're like, "Oh, you're being weird. You're the weird one." And I feel like Olala sometimes has that reaction to Kuan Yi, "Oh, you're a lot."
Yeah. Yeah. There again another sort of upswelling in the chat. I'm gonna be sure to phrase these as, do you have any thoughts about, because I know that we're not into giving rubber stamp canonical answers to things that are not in the work.
Not.
Do you have any thoughts about what happened to Mtendere's body? No is an acceptable answer.
Yeah, for your specific phrasing, do I have a single thought? No, never had one.
Head empty.
This is the first time.
Cool. Not relevant to the story, so it didn't.
They figured it out.
So we don't. Yeah, they figured it out. Great. I'm thrilled with any answer, because then presumably fewer of the questions in the chat will be about that.
Right. I mean, I guess because it's an emotional moment to give it an actual second. Jet did something respectful with it. I would need to sit down and think about what the respectful thing is, and I've got to write the next
Sure.
thing. So to be honest, I'm not going to do that.
There's
Sure.
a nice sci-fi funeral in the end of the Serenity movie. You know, and it's just like, it's very simple, and I think there's like very simple graves, and maybe there's like a hologram type of ball on top of it with the person's face.
Sounds familiar, yeah.
Yeah, and they just like do it at sunrise or sunset or something like that. And I don't think many words are said. And I could imagine something like that.
Here's a question from a little ways back in the chat as well that this person was wondering about your priorities when writing queer relationships. And I'm assuming that they mean sort of in terms of, you know, not just in terms of like the story you're trying to tell, but in terms of like, you know, representing them truthfully and knowing that because there's less representation, that there may, you know, more weight may fall on how you portray them.
I mean, I think we always try to give ourselves, we've said this many times, but we try to give ourselves space in the fact that almost all of the relationships are queer, so no particular one needs to bear all the weight. You know, you don't have that pressure of like, well, we can't portray an unhealthy queer relationship because that's saying that queer relationships are unhealthy, when like maybe you just wanted to write an unhealthy relationship because that's interesting to you. And so if we have a wide variety of them, like I think that helps. But also, I mean, in a certain way, this one is pretty challenging in the Juniverse, where it does seem that everybody's kind of whatever. Yes, there are pronouns, but like, I don't know, in a certain way there shouldn't be. Like, in a way that's almost inconsistent.
Right. There are some
with our vision.
There are some gimmies that we end up asking for, basically just so that we can get the story across in a way that's at all understandable,
right,
without reading like a syllabus first.
Right, because they I don't know, I feel like their like pronouns would be different, and as we've addressed before, it doesn't make any sense that people just know the pronouns to use automatically. Of course it doesn't make sense, but like, I'd rather not like sit here and dither about it. It's not interesting to me.
I think that could
Right,
make
it feels...
Sorry, go ahead, Noah.
No, I was just going to say, it feels like part of the sort of, you know, what we've talked about as being sort of a cartoon sensibility about the story, right? Is that, you know, and it's very similar to the "they figured it out" answer, which is whatever doesn't feel interesting or relevant or necessary to telling the story you want to tell,
we're going to hand wave it.
We don't need to spend time,
right,
you know, establishing the why and the how of it.
Right.
We just say, well, they figured it out.
Right, and the distinction that I think is worth making is that I think that a story that did that could be really cool. I'm not saying that it couldn't. It's like, sure, you know, but I think even in like the sci-fi genre, right? You've got sci-fi that is like accessible and crowd-pleasing, and then the example that's come to mind for me right now is like Ursula K. Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness, which is a tome that is hard to read.
Right.
And it takes very, very serious looks at like social rules in a totally alien landscape.
Right.
And the trade-off with that is that for huge chunks of the Left Hand of Darkness, especially in your first read-through, you have no idea what the hell is happening.
Right. And it's very internally consistent.
Yeah.
Like, in a way that we are not.
Yeah. It is this beautifully realized world that you need to work very, very hard to get a foot in.
Right. And that doesn't go with the like serial page turner, pulpy thing that we're doing.
Right. Our priorities are just different.
Right. Which is why we do hand wave the things that we hand wave. To return to the queer relationships thing, I think that in a way it's a little more relevant to the Second Citadel universe, in the sense that queer relationships there are queer. They are not the norm. Right. They have that weight on them. And whereas in the Juniverse, it's just, I don't know, people are just doing what they're doing, you know. That weight is not there, and we think it's nice to have a place where that weight is not there. And I think in some ways, you know, we kind of reference people's real world feelings about it a little bit. You know, the way in which having a gay relationship is not the same as having a heterosexual relationship, because you're looking at what is the same between you and that other person rather than we are different. Or at least that's how I think about it. So that is still the case, you know, in the gay relationships in the Juniverse. But the weight of being queer is not there.
Right. While we're talking about sort of the relationship between the story and our real world, another question that somebody asked that I think is a great one to touch on is about the second Citadel story this season. And obviously there's a fair bit of resonance here thematically with our world, right? We're talking about policing. And I don't remember how this person phrased it. It was a way up in the chat, but I guess I would be curious just to hear about how you came to that and what it was like writing not about such a sort of, you know, both top of mind and the hot button issue. I mean, truly, but you know, not writing about it directly, but writing with that in mind.
Well, we had to.
Yeah.
But also, I think we realized we had been all along.
Yes. So something that's definitely happened to us multiple times is that we will have been setting ourselves up for storylines that once they come up are suddenly very relevant to the public conversation, even though they weren't relevant or as relevant when we set them up, right? And it's not a declaration of genius. That's literally just, I think a lot of creators, a lot of artists end up doing that just because we're all receiving the same inputs. We're all receiving the same world and kind of processing it and maybe coming to the same conclusions. So we wanted to do with Second Citadel at the beginning, we wanted to do a police procedural with monsters. And as we did what we do with these stories, which is start like really questioning the assumptions that all the characters have about how their world and how their genre works, we came to a conclusion that I think is that this one I don't feel like I'm bragging about because plenty of other people have come to it too. I think it's the right one. I think it's unimpeachable, right? Which is that this institution that has made its entire mission has sort of made its entire mission in such a direction that does not actually help the people they're supposed to help, right? It is either irrelevant to the situation or actively harmful. And because we had built the Second Citadel world thinking about what we knew about police in our world, I think we ended up kind of setting ourselves up to explore it in more detail later on.
Yeah. I guess that's what I mean about we kind of were all along.
Yeah.
And we certainly were not smart enough or prescient enough when we started with Mark and Tal to be like, and eventually this is going to be, you know, something where we explore like fundamentally how problematic policing is. Like that was not it. Like we were not thinking about anything at all.
Right. No, the Janus piece was just a monster.
It was 2015 and everything was great for us.
Yeah.
And
Jesus.
And we weren't thinking about anything at all. We were just like, yeah, police procedurals, that's a fun genre. Like we were not interrogating.
Right. We were watching a lot of Brooklyn
Policing.
Nine-Nine.
Yeah.
It sort of, it doesn't get a lot more complicated than that,
Right.
actually.
Right. Because we were in a position to have been people who could watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine and not really think
Right.
deeply about it.
Right.
Still is a great show, but I'm sure the people who are making it have a lot to grapple with now.
Sorry, were you going to say something else?
No, I forgot.
Here's another question from the Patreon, which actually I can answer. So
Great.
you can take a break.
All right.
The question is, any chance of doing another virtual live show? The last one was a ton of fun. The answer is yes. There is a very good chance we will have another virtual live show. I would say we're not at the point where we're ready to announce it officially, but I would say very soon you can look for such an announcement. Yeah, we're going to be doing a really cool. I mean, it'll be another existing episode, but Kevin's started working really hard to revamp it into something that is both recognizable and something entirely new.
Yep.
And we're really trying to make this one very special in terms of production value and really embracing the digital medium. So I'm excited about it.
And it's also worth saying, without spoiling what it is, that it is one that we would never have been able to do in a regular live theater situation. Yeah. So this is the only way.
Too unwieldy in real life. So we're really excited that our hand has been forced into doing a digital version.
So this is the only way you would ever see it anyway.
Right. Yeah. That's part of the reason that this is the story that came up for us, is that we've always wanted to do this one, and the realities of doing it in person, we just can't. Be able to. So
made our heads hurt.
Yeah. So this is just a super exciting experiment that we're going on. I can't wait.
Yeah. So that will be coming down the pipeline very soon in the grand scheme of things. I literally, just because I answered that question, I forgot that I then had to ask the next one. I was like, so that's that, and sat back. Here's one more from the Patreon while we're there. When the Ruby 7 was first written to be the getaway car in the Train from Nowhere, were its Class X origins already planned to be revealed down the line, or was that a discovery later?
I feel like I've been wheedling you about the Ruby 7 for a very long time.
That's true. I've been very resistant.
Yeah, you have been very resistant. Also, when we talked about Juno joining up with a group of space criminals, and I suggested that one of them be Jets Kuliak, who is named in half a second in Train from Nowhere, and we knew nothing about him except for his connection to the Ruby 7. You also thought that was a really dumb idea.
It was just like, you just think his name is cool.
That's true.
Not everything has to connect to everything.
And it doesn't, but I think I made the right choice.
Oh yeah, he's one of my favorite characters.
Yeah. So basically, I guess to answer the question, like, we've had ideas about that for a very long time, in the same way that we've had ideas about a lot of things that could have ended up becoming larger overarching mysteries, but once we set something out, we realized it's actually enough. This doesn't imply any questions. I'm full. Thank you. I'm all set. And I really think we could have done that with the Ruby 7 too. There's no reason that it needed to come back.
Right.
But so long as it was going to come back, we wanted to really pull out all the stops and do something really exciting with it.
Right. And we do often do a thing where we'll get to a point in development and then we're like, wait, before we go any further, before we make up something completely new, let's just check back through our existing canon, and is there stuff that we've already established that we can pull on so that we build more connections rather than going off in completely new directions.
The law of conservation of story elements.
Yes, or what we call taking toys
the toys out of the toy box.
The toy box, right? Yes. Yeah. Here's one from the chat. I guess this is largely for Kevin, although I suppose Sylvia could be for you too as well. Is there a specific line that you thought of on its own?
How dare you?
It's cool, everybody. I'm going to pay for that for the rest of my life.
Okay, for those who are not watching but just listening, he just pushed
Oh, right. I forgot that in some case this will be an audio medium.
Off-screen?
It was for this reaction, if it's any consolation.
The nerve.
Yeah.
The audacity.
No, you were saying something really interesting that I feel like we should move on to.
Oh, that's entirely possible. This is way more interesting.
I'm sorry, is there a line? That was the beginning of the question.
Is there a line that you thought up sort of devoid of context and then sort of were able to look forward to finding a way to give it context in the script? Or or is that just not how your brain works?
Every line I've ever done that for has not made it into the final draft. That's the honest answer. So I have a small collection of lines that I really like how they sound that I won't say out loud because part of me still believes they'll end up in something someday. And also, the best lines I write happen just when I'm sitting down to write. They kind of...
Sure.
I find that part of the reason that it's important to me to try to write every day is because the characters are a lot smarter than I am. And so when I am writing from their perspective, that's when the cool stuff gets said. when Kevin Vibert's out on the street drinking his Dunkin' Donuts and just thinking about stuff, it's more things like, why do clouds up? It's not much, right? And so I need to put myself in Jet's head. So even like the wise stuff that Jet says, I just put myself in his headspace, and something comes out, and I'm like, it sounds right. I didn't know that before 10 minutes ago.
They legit are smarter than you.
Yep, significantly smarter than me.
But I've been noticing that since Prince of Mars.
Yeah.
Okay, but sometimes there are things that
I've been noticing that you haven't been that smart since Prince of Mars.
Honestly, if I kept up the ruse that long, that's a compliment.
There are lines that I come up with devoid of context, or like sentiments that I come up with devoid of context, and I'm like, you have to put that somewhere. Put that somewhere.
That's true.
Hey, find a place. Put that somewhere.
That's true.
Okay, a good example of that is the thing that Rita says about calling Nureyev ransom.
Yes,
because she knows his real name, and she says, no, but if somebody tells you what to call them, then that's what you call them. And I was like, put it somewhere. And and for a while you were like, yeah, I really like it, but like there is not really a place for that to go. But eventually you did find one. Yeah.
No, I hate to admit it, but usually when you make a demand like that, it's
always always right. Always right.
Gonna need the receipts on that one.
I had a question here and then I lost it. Curses. Okay. Here's one for Sophie to hate. If you could make one story into a musical, which would you choose? Juno or Second Citadel?
Well, actually, Juno. I just have an answer. Is that your answer as well?
No, Second Citadel is my answer.
Oh, okay.
100%. Why? Largely because I would want to write it around the keep.
Oh, I see.
We have a magical creature that sings.
Right.
I think that's the perfect inn.
I think the reason I would do Juno is because the fact that it's, or at least apart from season 3, the fact that it is less of an ensemble cast and more of a like, here's a main character, here's a love interest, like that lends itself more easily to a traditional musical setup. You know, you could easily slot in those musical tropes with those character setups.
Here's a question that I think someone went so deep in the lore for that I don't even know what they're talking about. It says, will we hear more about Tom and or Kay in the podcast?
Oh.
And I don't know who those people are.
Those are referring...
I hope you do.
That's referring to very, very early drafts of Angel of Brahma. Oh, I see. Yeah, no, the Angel of Brahma near killed me. I ended up writing... For what ended up being 2 episodes, I think I ended up writing between 6 and 8 episodes. And we ended up carving it down to that 2.
Remember when we had that kind of time?
It wasn't time; it was energy, man. The way that I did that was I sat down. It was during a summer vacation, and I just wrote for hours every single day until I felt like my eyeballs were going to fall out.
You were such a little baby.
I was such a little baby, just burning myself to the ground. Yeah. And I'm very glad I don't do that anymore.
I cannot believe how much we have aged in 5 years. Not physically, obviously, I look amazing, but you know.
No, I mean it's pretty incredible.
To be fair, the past year has been 7.
Right.
Yes.
No, it is. I'd say we've aged anywhere between 4 and 6 years. So to answer that question, anything that's on Patreon that's like an early draft of something, don't consider it a hint at the future is the best thing that I'd say. It's basically just an idea we had at the time. Are we still having that idea? Will that idea come up in the future?
Maybe.
I'm not going to tell you what happens next.
Who's to say? Us, but we won't.
Right. So I would say.
Also, who is this?
So in the earliest draft. Oh no, you're asking about that, not Tom and Kevin.
Yeah, no.
It's just
Kevin, you're yourself.
Fancy person that I've decided to be.
In the very earliest drafts of Angel of Brahma, we saw some little child, Nureyev, and some elaborating on his story. But a lot of what happened in that version of the story has been contradicted or deconfirmed at this point. So definitely don't go looking to that script like a secret trove of extra lore. That was an idea we had on the way to having the idea that was the episode, is kind of how I'd put it.
It's like the it's the toy box. It's part of the toy box, right? But nothing in there has come out of the toy box.
Right. We've never officially taken that toy out of the toy box. Right. You're exactly right.
Yes.
Did you see the gears moving as I tried to expand that metaphor? Oh boy. Let's see here. From the Patreon, we've got a question about how far in advance you plan the season's major plot points. This person asked specifically, like, for instance, at what point did you know that Nureyev was going to disappear this season?
I mean, end of season 2.
Yeah.
the episode we brought him back.
Right.
I mean, before that, honestly.
I mean, look, here's the thing. Like, it's been well established. Like, he has this catchphrase, right? When trouble arises, I disappear. So, like, you have to follow through on that.
Right.
Like, I think that, you know, I know that it makes people want to tear out their hair every time he disappears. But I don't care. No, I mean, I care, but like, but I think that you need to follow through on character pieces like that. Mm-hmm. You just have to. Like, even if it is frustrating, because that's who he is.
And, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but we're talking about, like, you know, the dial, you know, the way that sort of story decisions and real world strictures sort of interact, right? Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think part of that thought, in addition to being a very reasonable character action for him to take, was the knowledge that I'd be moving, which I have.
I think that cemented it.
And
yes,
that for, you know, so that there, you know, there would be less need for me to be there, present, during the next season. Of course,
little did we know.
Of course, now, you know, we can do this and it's fine. And so who knows what, how, I don't even know how you've adjusted your thoughts about the next season and how present or absent Nureyev will be. But,
no, I think that definitely entered into the thought process.
Yeah.
But
and I just think it's nice to talk about that, only because I think like I think there can be this idea that, like, if you're letting the real world strictures dictate your story, then somehow the story is, I don't know, it's tainted, right? Like it's not pure storytelling, but the truth is that it's always influenced by what we're capable of doing, and that doesn't actually make the story worse. It usually makes it better, because additional parameters breed creativity.
Yeah,
right. I wouldn't want to.
I love it.
I don't want to talk about anybody's specific personal situation, but even like the structure of Juno for season 3, we first had the idea because of something that somebody had going on.
Right.
And once we had the idea, there was no letting go of it, because we fell so in love with it.
Right.
But if that potentially really, really bad production reality had not even come up as a possibility, I think we wouldn't have made something as, like, specific and cool as we did.
Yeah, which I love so much.
Yeah.
So.
Do you have any thoughts about, Sam, if the crime family were stuck in quarantine like we were this year, what they would have gotten up to?
Exactly what they got up to. Like, they're on the ship together with nobody else all the time.
Well, but let's say they're quarantined separately, or at least, or like they can't they can't hop down and do a heist.
Right.
Gotcha.
I don't think Rita would notice.
That's true.
Rita could go.
She has her snacks. She has her streams. She's having a great time.
Yeah, Rita probably wouldn't notice.
Juno would be mad and bad.
Yeah. Oh, Juno would regress significantly.
Yes, it would be so bad for him.
He'd figure some stuff out too, though.
Jet would do a lot of like meditation.
He'd you know what? He'd probably like buy like a busted up old car and like spend the year fixing it. He'd probably like,
I was gonna say he'd be making sourdough.
Sure. Yeah, he would make sourdough.
He would divert some of his preciousness about the Ruby 7 to his sourdough starter.
God,
Although let's be real, we already have a sourdough starter character in this in this season, and it's the Cure Mother Prize.
100%.
It's a yeast.
It's a yeast.
Yes.
A friend of ours who like mans the recording deck for literally our first recordings ever. Went to culinary school, does a lot of stuff with cooking. I still remember very early when we were doing the series, he was talking to me about keeping a yeast mother in his home, and he was talking about this cooking ingredient that he's keeping like a pet in his refrigerator, and it was so nightmarish I couldn't let it go.
Wow. There you go. Yeah, I was thinking like, yeah, they could have had some good kombucha on the ship before. Sorry, I've gotten so distracted by that. I'm not even looking for questions. Let's see here. Feel free to drop some more questions now because I know I've missed some. This person is wondering if this is sort of logistical, but if we're planning on going back to uploading episodes to YouTube.
It's a good
question. We used to, didn't we?
We did. We did. We kind of stopped because nobody was watching them, and it took a decent chunk of extra time.
It takes so long to upload stuff to YouTube.
So it sounds like maybe no.
Yeah, I'm not like the thing that I'm opposed to about it is that it takes a lot of time that currently we don't have. If we were able to solve that, then yeah, sure, I would want it in more places so more people can see it.
This person is asking, is the title "Man in Glass" a reference to the poem "The Man in Glass"? And I assume you're giving the name of the poet here.
I don't know that poem.
No,
Man in Glass, Peter Dale Wimbrow Sr.
Huh.
Okay, I don't know it either. But they follow that up with, are there any other funky literary references we didn't notice?
Probably.
In part one of What Lies Beyond, that was a long episode, and I was having trouble while I was writing it, so I did throw in some references just for me, but I don't think they were literary.
Maybe.
I think they were just dumb, to be honest with you.
Hey, things can be dumb and literary.
That's true.
Look at me.
Do you want to come up?
I can't think of any.
Yeah. All right. Let's see here.
Good girl.
Was there any media you took inspiration from for the particularly for season 3 plot lines? I know we've talked about this before in general, but any updates to the list of things that inspired particular episodes or plot lines?
What were we watching?
This was the first season where you and I didn't have a show that we were watching.
That's true.
So we kind of started spending our time a little bit differently.
Right.
So we were each kind of bringing in our own things.
Yeah. I honestly don't remember. I watched a lot of Elementary. I don't remember if that influenced stuff. It might have.
Yeah.
Yes, I watched all of Elementary except for the last episode, and then I stopped, and I still haven't watched the last episode.
That's me in the last 3 episodes of BoJack Horseman. You're in good company.
Miss Slice, what are you doing?
I don't think she likes it up here, man.
Well, she asked. Okay. You're a good girl.
Equivocating.
You're a good girl.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. This person is curious about how we started working with Unjimily. And then second question is what your favorite song is of theirs.
Ooh. Well, the way we started working with them was, as I said, I just sort of had this idea that I wanted to work with a singer and kind of build an episode around that. And then I think I just went on my personal Facebook and like made a post saying that I was looking for a performer within certain parameters. I said aiming for folky, but you know, whatever works. And then just one person and somebody who plays an instrument that is like easy to record with just by yourself. And that post got shared around a little bit, and somebody tagged Anjimali, who was like, this is just the luckiest break of my whole life, because he was like just about to blow up big time, but hadn't quite blown up big time yet. That was just luck. That was just pure luck, and I just got in there.
I mean, we could never get them now.
Absolutely
right?
not.
Like, it's...
Absolutely not. They're way too famous. Too famous.
Weren't they on the cover of Rolling Stone? What their
Not
name?
the cover of Rolling Stone.
Their name was on there
they were
because
in
of the
Rolling
article.
Stone.
Yeah.
They're Tegan and Sarah are like, oh, Anjimali is so good. Like, I can't.
Right.
We don't deserve.
It's wild.
So that was luck that we got in there. So yeah, and then we just sort of had some meetings with him and built the character around him. My favorite song is "Maker," which is in Tools of Rust in the background.
Maker is how you pitched me on Anjimali.
Yeah,
Absolutely worked.
such a good song.
Yep.
I'm just gonna read this verbatim because there's nothing else to do with it. Is thoughts on Rita getting a werewolf girlfriend, possibly? I mean, we don't even need to answer that. I don't know. I thought it needed to be aired in the space.
Kevin looked like he had a thought.
No, actually, I was trying to quantify the number of thoughts that I had, and I was trying to decide whether 0 or 1 was the more honest answer.
She just thinks they're handsome.
She just thinks they're handsome.
That is one of my favorite things. But also, I do remember, like, Rita, like, being in rehearsal for that, and Kate saying, I just think they're handsome. And then me and Kate looked at each other and were like...
Oh, my God. Maybe we go for, like, 10 more minutes?
Yeah, I think let's try to wrap it up by 4:30.
Cool.
That makes sense to me. Let's see here. What are some of your favorite ways different characters changed or affected each other this season because of their various relationships? This is sort of a follow-on to the dynamics question.
Mm-hmm. For me, actually, the two that are immediately coming to mind are both from Second Citadel, which the pieces of interaction we get between Ola and Caroline really mean a lot to me, because the ways in which Caroline can be a gigantic heel actually align quite well with what Ola kind of emotionally needs, right? Just in terms of, like, because of the way in which Ola gets anxious, she needs somebody who's going to tell her, like, the brutal truth no matter what. And Caroline will not shy from that. And I like that we have taken this trait that in Caroline that has been kind of maligned by other characters for so long and given it a very useful place for a little kid, right? I really like the dynamic. And the other one for me is the way that Angelo grew over the season, especially after he met the kite. And the... is it weird that I feel weird about spoiling the last episode of Second Citadel?
You're good.
I'm good. I can just say it.
It's a little weird, yeah. I mean, I feel like we've spoiled plenty. So
that's true.
I meant to start with a spoiler warning, but I feel like people figured it out.
But because we knew even then that the kite was Sir Galahad the Great. He was the greatest knight who ever lived. And the way that Galahad talks to Angelo, like he's taking him under his wing, like, listen, kid, you got lost on the way here, but you've got it in you. And Angelo, upon meeting, like, the perfect version of the man that he thought he wanted to be, reacting with this, like, deep horror, like, brought both of those characters to life for me in a way that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah. I mean, very much the foundations of Angelo's world are crumbling, and he's picking up the pieces there. I really like the way Juno and Vespa's relationship
Yes.
has developed, each of them. You know, when there's somebody that you just have to spend a lot of time with and maybe you're too similar and you really, like, those edges rub up against each other too much, but you have to find a way to coexist.
Right.
And it seems to have made Juno gentler. And I think it's not made Vespa gentler exactly, but in some ways her fierceness has become more totemic, which is something we talk about sometimes.
Yeah.
Which is something that you say about me sometimes, which is that, like, I have bad traits that full stop that I have bad traits that I will kind of caricature.
Yeah.
Because that's like putting them in a safe place and being really over the top with them, and then we're kind of tacitly acknowledging that I'm trying to move away from those.
Right. You'll exaggerate them to a degree where we know that
It's
you're
not
kidding.
serious, yes.
And it's also kind of funny because we know that you mean a tiny seed of it.
Yes, exactly. That I have that impulse.
Yeah.
And I think Vespa, we see her doing that sometimes with, like, being incredibly aggressive and violent, that, like, you know, she sometimes it's not 100% real.
Right.
She's backing away from that a little bit.
And with that relationship, I remember, like, for some people are actually quite good about not directly messaging us with requests for the story, which I appreciate.
They used to.
They used to a lot. One that we got quite a bit at the beginning of this season, I remember, was that they couldn't wait, or they really wanted for Vespa and Juno to end up friends.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember from very early on, like, what we had said about it was that, like, no, I don't want to do that. They will end up loving each other. They'll
Right.
end up trusting each other. They'll
Right.
end up extremely important to each other.
But not everybody's friends.
They're not going to like each other.
Yeah.
And, like, I think that developing a love for somebody that you don't even like is
Yeah.
a really powerful thing that
Sometimes
was
you
really fun
have
to
to.
explore. Yeah.
And that's family,
Yeah.
right?
That is family.
That's family. Loving someone that you don't even really like.
And that is family. Another couple quick questions. Well, I should say they're not inherently quick. So one question is about Sasha and Juno, and at what point you knew that you'd be sort of putting them in conflict in the way that you did. Where, you know, how far back did that come from?
I think we knew for a long time that things were going to have to come to a head with Dark Matters.
Yeah.
And then I think we had, like, put a pin in that. And then we just kind of, like, followed that logical train of thought,
Yeah.
which was like, well, wait, but Sasha is in charge of Dark Matters now. So, like, hasn't she fixed everything? And then we were like, maybe not, though.
Right. Yeah, a lot of something that we'd said in Writing Fiction Across the Void too is that a lot of times I think creative decisions that can feel as, like, an observer big and impressive and surprising are really the result of just asking a million tiny little questions until you get to an interesting answer. So for us, it was very much like, if Juno's going to be a criminal, he needs to bump into Dark Matters.
Right.
There's no way out of it, right?
Yeah.
Sasha's still a member of Dark Matters. How do we make these two go together? And just asking little questions about it. Did Sasha get killed, and so now she's not a concern? No, it's not satisfying. What if we go this way? What if we go this way?
Right.
And eventually, you kind of stumble upon the world, the storyline it needs to be.
Yes, and, like, this is definitely the way that I approach storytelling, and it's part of why I struggled so much with it for such a long time, and it's kind of how I've characterized the difference between us, is that, like, you are very creative in a pure sense of the word, that you just, like, come up with stuff. And I'm much better with working with stuff that's already there. Although, as we've talked about, I think I've gotten better over time at coming up with stuff.
I think we've grown towards each other in that regard, yeah.
But I'm very into, like, this sounds silly when it comes to storytelling, but finding the right answer. Given the parameters that we have set, what are even the possibilities that it could be? And then how can we narrow it down based on what is narratively satisfying, what makes sense for the characters? And then there's kind of, like, a right answer.
Yeah, instead of worrying about how do we instead of, like, having a blank page in front of you and thinking, I want to write a story that has a cool answer. In some ways, it's been really useful for us to set up a cool situation or a cool question, and then figure out what the only
the right
answer
answer,
is. Because if the question, the situation is cool, the answer's got to be cool.
Yeah.
One final question from the chat, and I think we can maybe all very briefly weigh in on this, is just about staying creative in a pandemic. I mean, I can say a couple quick things, which is just that it's really hard. It's been hard.
Yeah.
In so many ways, just mentally and in terms of being able to focus and for me, the best way to keep being creative was that we had to. Is that we have a schedule, and we have episodes that need to come out, and we had a live show to do, and all these people were depending on me to do it, and so yeah, that's my take on being creative in a pandemic.
No,
is
that's absolutely
one, it's hard. Two, it is the easiest way to do it is to have to do it.
Yeah, if you have accountability.
Yep.
In some way, yeah.
And I mean, for me, it's been a struggle every day not to completely beat myself up for the fact that I can't do as much during the pandemic as I can. But I hope I'm going to find out that I can when we get out of it again. I hope it's not just that I'm old. But like, I think the kind of the metric that I've used to describe it to people is that, like, I was writing for 1,000 words or an hour every single day from when I was 19 to midway through when I was 29, which is when the pandemic started. And the pandemic was literally the only thing that made me break that streak, and it's been very difficult for me to go back to it. And I've got a diagnosis that says I need to do the same things over and over again, man. So at that point...
I have a diagnosis.
Have I shown you my diagnosis? So yeah, it's sometimes I try to rest back on that as like, wow, this really is powerful. It's powerful enough that it controlled my brain chemistry in a way that I can't. So yeah. I have to go easy on myself. I have to be accepting of it.
I think also maybe this comes with like age a little bit. I feel like you hit 30 and you're like, I'm so old, and that's all you talk about. But I think it's just because it's when you start to feel oldness, right, and you haven't before. But the fact that like there's gonna be phases to how you operate and what is healthy for you in a given moment, and like, yep, you don't have to be like, okay, well, I have to figure out the optimal way for me to exist and what my schedule is going to be, and like how I'm going to get myself to do things, and like, because it's not, I don't think it is always going to stay consistent. It's just going to fluctuate. And you know, like within the pandemic, there have been periods of time where what was best for me in that moment was honestly to do nothing but work. Like, work was the only thing I could bring myself to do, and I could just bury myself in sound design for 10 hours a day, and like that was what I was doing, and that was working for me. And there were other times where I had to be like, I need to sleep all day. I just need to sleep all day. This is what I'm doing. And then there were other times where I needed to be like, I'm going to make a schedule. I'm going to exercise to get myself going, and then I'm going to do a couple hours work, and then I'm going to take a walk, and like, it's okay to have to keep reevaluating, right, your status and what's going to work for you in this moment, and you don't have to worry about finding the perfect balance that's going to work forever. It won't.
I actually needed that specific pick-me-up today, so thank you. That really helped. I'm feeling better.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think that is the end on questions. I think... You two had a couple things you wanted to talk about before we depart, yeah?
Yes.
You did. Would you like me to go first?
Sure.
Yeah, so I just wanted to announce here, I've said it on my own stream separately, but because of all your support on the Patreon, starting the end of this school year, I'm going to be full-time on the Penumbra for the foreseeable future. It's been a dream of mine to be able to write like as my living for ever. And in my life plan, like the optimistic take I had on it for a very long time was like, I started teaching early, so I could probably retire around 60, and then I could have a full career as a writer when that happens. Which I'd be totally cool with that life. So this one is, I'm joking about it because I'm so overwhelmed by how grateful I am, and by how much you all believe in us, in our story. And it means a lot. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to me to return the favor, I guess. To make the stories worth it.
Round of applause for Kevin.
And I will say it's good for the rest of the more time Kevin can dedicate to this podcast, the better for all of us, both from a creative and an administrative perspective. Like, it's the best stories we can get, and it's just it really does. It's good for Kevin, obviously, that you get to live this life, but it's also good for all of us and for the podcast itself.
Yeah, and if you want a very measurable version of that, What Lies Beyond, the way that we did it, no way I could have done it while I was still a full-time teacher. That if you wanted that same amount of content, each episode would have been half as long, or it would have been a 40-parter. There's just
yikes.
There's just no way. And it was one of the most satisfying, one of the most creatively fulfilling things I've ever done, flat out. And I'm so grateful that I got to do it and to give it to you all.
I'm so proud of you.
Thanks.
So thank you all for making that possible.
I also have a personal announcement to make. Well, it's a more personal announcement to make. In quarantine, I have been transitioning a lot. I went into quarantine non-binary, but I think this is probably the case for a lot of trans people, that just stuff has happened in quarantine, spending a lot of time with yourself. And I decided to, I don't know if it's correct to say change my name, but I've decided to take on a new name. And I made that decision a little while ago, and have talked to people I knew in person about it. And I decided not to change my name professionally, just because I figured it would be confusing. My name is on all of our work. I don't want it to suddenly be something different. But my friends now know that I'm going by Harley. And I wanted to let you all know that, just so you know it. And because that way, if Kevin wants to refer to me as that in a public-facing situation, or if Noah wants to refer to me as that, you'll know who they're talking about. So it's still okay to call me Sophie. That's not, you don't have to think of it as my dead name. It's just not really what I'm going by in real life right now. So it's Harley from here on out. And yeah, this is just sort of my soft announcement of that. So thanks for hearing it.
And just because I'm sure we and you will field some questions about this, you're cool with people referring to you as either in the context of as either Harley or Sophie in the context of the podcast.
Yes, that's fine. It's really just that it makes it easier for me to adjust that name if the people around me use it more, and we do so much, on the record that they're calling me Sophie all the time, and it's just making it hard for me to adjust. So I just wanted to push that transition a little bit further.
I believe you said that professionally, you're sort of your professional name as co-creator of the show.
Yeah, is still Sophie Takagi Kaner, and I'm not going to change that anytime soon. I might eventually, I don't really know. But again, referring to me as either is totally fine.
Cool.
What do you got, Noah?
Oh, God. I know. I really should have prepared something great and personal and really joyous. But really, I've got I don't know. I've got a seltzer here.
Yes!
You heard it here.
The man has a seltzer here.
You heard it here first, folks.
Thanks, Noah.
Thank you both so much for doing this. This was a delight. Always is.
Yes.
And patrons, thank you so much for tuning in, and also for making this possible through your generosity.
Yes.
Both this event and literally everything we do. The
chat wants you to make the noise, Noah.
But you hear me do it
just
all the time in the episode.
But they don't get to see your face when you do
it. It will be a letdown. My face literally doesn't change. I just go. Like literally, there's nothing moving on my face when I do it.
But I think
It's
it'll
just my
make them
tongue.
really happy.
I guess that in and of itself is memeable, right? The idea that the blank face with the
And that's what's important, memeability.
yeah. So thank you all, and thank you all of you who are listening in the future when this exists as an audio form. Thank you for listening as well. Yeah, I'm excited to keep going with everything.
We'll be
Live
back
shows
soon.
and season 4
Yeah.
and more Patreon bonuses and all of that. So
Woo.
we are always revving up.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you. And
Pine Slice is napping, but she says bye.
Bye, everybody.